Welcome to the Cyber Guy Podcast, your source for engaging cyber education, cyber discussions, and a look at current cyber news and trends with retired FBI Special Agent Darren Mott.
Hello, friends. It is October, which means it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and the Cyber Guy Podcast is back with a new episode. Finally, I apologize for the last couple of weeks. I've been focused more on some other things, including the morning Cyber Smart Morning News Update, which you can also get from all of your favorite podcast providers. If you are already a subscriber to the Cyber Smart podcast I was doing, the morning news update basically took over that slot. So you would still be receiving these particular episodes. But as always, I appreciate new followers. I appreciate you sharing information on that podcast. It is about 10 to 15 minutes every day on cyber news that occurred in the previous 24 hours. It's usually 6 articles, more or less. It's not every cyber news piece, but it's cyber news that I can kind of expound upon and make you aware of, again, because as I like to say, knowledge is protection. The more we understand the threats targeting us, we can assess our risk and proceed wisely. So we got that going for us, which is nice. And like I mentioned, it is the start of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm recording this on Sunday, October 1st, the first day. I did post, I'll be honest, I posted a LinkedIn topic, and here's what I'm kind of doing. I was going to do on LinkedIn for Cybersecurity Awareness Month is post some article, some writing every day. A lot of people do videos. I don't like doing videos. I'm not very good at them. You don't want to see my ugly face, so let's be honest, that's how that is. So I tend to like to write. So I had come up with a bunch of topics, or actually ChatGPT, honestly, had come up with topics that kind of was going to have a satirical focus, but they suck. The first one I did is on machines and robots and blah, blah, blah. And I read it. I'm like, this blows. But I posted it anyway. So if you read it, I apologize that I posted it out there. I'm going to take a different approach to Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I got like 12 hours before tomorrow morning to figure out what to put for October 2nd, but I'll come up with something. So hopefully that'll be there. And, this episode of the Cyber Guy Podcast, I should mention, is one I've been wanting to do for a while. There was an FBI agent I worked with in Cleveland. Her name is Suzanne Lewis-Johnson. She has since left the bureau for bigger and brighter things, and she'll talk a little bit about that. But she has got a great origin story. So again, it goes to show that you don't. A lot of people think to go in the FBI, you have to be a lawyer, accountant, or be in the military, be a law enforcement person. You don't, as Suzanne will note. And she did some great things. She was a Director's Award winner. I liked her a lot because she's outspoken. That's a fan of that. That was always my thing too. So we are birds of a feather in that particular perspective. So I think you'll enjoy that interview. That's coming up in a few minutes. And that will be her origin story for this. But I just kind of want to talk about some other things going forward. Let's talk about Cybersecurity Awareness Month a little bit. In all honesty, it's going to be people in the cybersecurity business entity or the cybersecurity realm talking to each other about cybersecurity stuff and how more people need to be aware. The people who need to be aware are probably not going to be paying attention to what we say. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know why I'm taking that tact. I kind of honestly dislike all these organized months of stuff. And so, probably I have a bad attitude toward it on the first day of it. Maybe I will get better as I go forward. But I mean, someone talk me off the ledge. If you hear this and you want to talk me off the ledge of it, feel free to do so. But, maybe that'll be my October 2nd post is, what are we doing here? That sounds, maybe I will do that. Anyway, certainly be a Substack writing in there. So one thing I want to note is you can follow me on a bunch of different social media platforms as well now. I'm on Instagram, which I hate Instagram, frankly. I don't really use it for what it's used for. I don't do a lot of videos. I usually use static pictures and post stuff that I post on LinkedIn on there. So let's be honest, that's what that is. Facebook, kind of the same thing. I do use Facebook for some pickleball organizing, so I do use it for that. I do have a new Substack, so look for the Cyber Guy on Substack. I do some writing there. It's all free, doesn't cost you anything. And X, so formerly Twitter. I do have a Twitter account, the Cyber Guy there. And basically, again, it's a rehashing of what I'm posting on LinkedIn, but trying to post them in different places. LinkedIn is always going to be the best place to find me. LinkedIn.com/in/Darren Mott is where you can get me there. I'm always happy to talk to folks who want to email me, Darren@thecyberguy.com. You can certainly do that. And I think that is the main points here. Yeah. So social media stuff. And of course, the Cyber Smart Morning News Update. Download it, start listening. If you're bored in the morning, it'll give you 15 minutes to kill some time and find out what happened overnight and what you need to be aware of, especially if you're in cybersecurity or IT. You can figure out if you have something that I noted was compromised that you have to patch, then you'll know to patch it. So you got that going for you, which is nice. But without any further ado, that's enough of me pontificating here. Let's get to the real reason this podcast is put out this particular week. It is to talk to former FBI Special Agent Suzanne Lewis-Johnson. I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed talking to her. So I've been waiting a long time to have this particular interview. I want to welcome to the CyBUr Guy podcast, and with her origin story, former fellow FBI special agent and current CEO of No More Trafficking, Suzanne Lewis-Johnson. Suzanne, thanks so much for taking the time to come on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, full disclosure, we both worked together in the Cleveland field office from 2009 to 2011. So I'm sure when we get to that part of your story, we may break off into that a little bit and talk about parts of that you want to, and we'll avoid those parts that you don't want to. So I certainly get that. So tell us, so let's go ahead and let's just get right into it. As we mentioned in the little pre-show, this is just kind of your story. You know, how did you get from where you started to where you are today? So lead us down that story path.
Right. You know, I've said at times I feel like a pinball in a pinball machine, because we have a plan and dreams for how things might look. But our plans and our dreams don't always match up. You know, becoming an FBI agent for me was a dream, not a goal. That didn't seem very realistic. I grew up in the tiniest of towns in the middle of nowhere. I have a brother-in-law who says that we're actually from 50 miles from nowhere, that he identifies nowhere. And then where my family was 50 miles from that. So never knew anybody.
Oh, sorry. So where is that? So you're saying 50 miles from, because I think I can beat you. So where was that?
Emporium, Pennsylvania, Cameron County. It was, at the time I was growing up, I think 97% forest, except during hunting and fishing season, our population multiplied. There was one stoplight in the entire county.
Okay. So how many people did you live in a town or a village?
Well, the county seat of Emporium, which means center of trade, had, I think, about 1,500 people at that time. Okay. I lived 6 miles outside of town. Okay, we were pretty close. I think there was maybe 1,500 to 1,600 in my little town, but we had no stoplights. And I like to tell. Well, the problem was they decided they were going to get a stoplight in the little. I lived in a village, mind you. Yeah. They were going to get a stoplight, but the village board couldn't decide on the colors. So that's why they didn't go with that. So I like to tell people it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there, because it was in the upstate New York, right on the Canadian border. So middle of nowhere. Anyway. That sounds about right. Well, actually, so we would drive to Olean, which is just across the border into New York, to go to the movies, which was an hour away, or we would drive to Du Bois, Pennsylvania, which was also an hour away. So, I mean, it was an amazing privilege to grow up there, and the sense of community and really the natural resources that were accessible, but other sorts of things you really had to make an effort to access civilization.
Gotcha. Well, you do have me kind of beat that on that one then. So, okay. So sorry I interrupted your story. So carry on. You're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, so I didn't really know anything about the field of law enforcement from direct connection at that time, but I went away to school in Massachusetts, about 10 hours from home, to this tiny little college no one had ever heard of. I went from there, realized I'd always had a passion for writing, but I'd always been the absolute shyest person in my class. I would be terrified if I needed to get up in front of people and talk, and yet I always have had this passion for justice. And there have been times where I just couldn't keep quiet, advocating for some injustice in front of me or beside me, even on the playground, from the time that I was small. So I went from this little community away to school, and I majored in English. There was no journalism major or writing major. So I ended up majoring in English literature, did a couple of newspaper internships, and did a public relations internship as well. And what I found, being this shy, introverted person that I was, public relations was incredibly uncomfortable for me, because I was working for this amazing agency with great people, very qualified professionals, and I was selling products, which I didn't really feel very passionate about. So for me to speak, I need to be speaking motivated by that place of I'm doing something good for the world. And so that was not a really comfortable place for me to be in, where I was calling up journalists and making these cold calls, trying to pitch them on covering stories and products. So that took me then from I graduate, having decided I love to write. I don't really feel called to the world of marketing or communications. But I went and worked for this nonprofit organization after college called Habitat for Humanity International. I went to their headquarters. I sent off some resumes to some places. I saw that they had some writing jobs, applied for those. But what I was invited to come do was PR and marketing, exactly what I decided I wasn't going to do. They had what was called an extended volunteer program at that time. And it meant you could come, you'd get a stipend for living expenses every month. You would live in their housing. You'd get health insurance, and you would have this amazing opportunity to work for a global nonprofit addressing the need for simple, decent, affordable housing. And so I felt that I was passionate enough about that cause that maybe this was somewhere that I could be, that I could bring those communication skills and experience into play, even though I was doing exactly what I decided not to do, which was working in marketing. And I spent almost 10 years there, off and on. I worked at the headquarters. I was hired into a salaried position as a media associate. And then when I got married, my husband was in the military, and that meant I could no longer live and work at headquarters. And so I followed him. But as I was doing that, I was being brought different projects from Habitat that I did on a consultant basis, and then was brought back onto staff again. And I got to travel the country and even travel internationally, going places. I've said as a 20-something-year-old, just out of school, I had no business going some of the places that I did, following around the CEO of a global nonprofit. I was working with members of Congress. I worked with every governor's office in the country. I worked with some of the largest corporations in the country. And then at the same time, I was working with these people who were in such desperate need. And I was seeing so many broken circumstances and so much injustice that they had experienced that was a part of it was a part of what had taken them to this place in life where they needed shelter, but they also needed some other things to surround them. And so again, the FBI, it's always been this thing that you see the movies, you see the television shows, you hear the stories, but I still didn't know anyone who was working in that arena. It was this thing that looked great on the screen, but I was not considering going down that road until someone close to me unexpectedly went down that road and became an agent. And I call him the accidental agent, because after becoming an agent, after applying for the Bureau, after getting to know other people's stories, for most people, it's really something you have to work hard to do, I think. There's a lot of people who dream and strive and pursue that opportunity and don't get into the Bureau. But in this particular instance, I had the opportunity to watch someone close to me go through the process. And rather than having that perception from what's painted on a screen and told through these dramas on TV, I was getting a little exposure to the real thing and the process. And I kept asking questions, and he was encouraging me to do it. Well, maybe that's something you should pursue.
So where were you at this time?
At that time, I was telecommuting, doing some work for Habitat for Humanity. I had 2 children, and I was living in the state of Kentucky.
Okay, fair enough.
So by that point in time, I had graduated from college in Massachusetts. I went to work in Georgia at Habitat for Humanity's international headquarters, had traveled all over the place working for them, had gotten married, lived in Georgia for a little bit, and now was living in Kentucky, right outside of Fort Knox, Kentucky. And so it was the Bureau that took our family on the path to Cleveland and where I met you. but it was just having that close-up view, understanding that I have this incredible heart for justice, seeing needs in front of me, seeing injustice that I couldn't fix from where I was, and now being encouraged that this sort of dream job that I didn't think I could pursue, that there might actually be an avenue for me to do that. And my family encouraged me to pursue it. And then there were a couple other folks at Fort Knox, one in particular who ended up applying as well, and we kind of went through the process together. So that helped as well. And for me, it took really some thought for all of the pieces. For me, I think it was an 8-page resume for kind of the trailblazer who went before me. When he applied, he filled out this little form online that he said looked a little like, when you go to a website and you fill out a little information, if you're going to a college website or a volunteering site or something like that, you just fill out your name, address, phone number, and maybe one line about yourself. That's what it looked like for him.
And what year was that? What year was that for him?
Oh, I don't even know. I don't recall.
Mid-90s, maybe, because that kind of sounds familiar to mine. When I went in, I was like, it wasn't a big online application. It was like, hey, yeah, this is interesting. I'd like to try.
Yeah, it was. I want to say it was the early 2000s.
Okay.
Early to mid 2000s. And once he got to Quantico, he was the only person in his class too who had filled out that version.
Oh wow!
So it's just interesting, how one thing affects another, because he would not have gone in if he had to fill out this long application and think through every detail of his life and write the 8-page resume that I had done. He never would have pursued it. Mm-hmm. He literally thought they were going to send him some information and instead got a phone call that you've applied for the Bureau. Will you come take this test?
Yep.
And lots of people do the long application and never get the phone call, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, because sure, you might end up getting the call, right? So I started the process, and it was a long process of about 2 years, but landed in late 2008 at the FBI Academy.
Okay.
Maybe it was 2007. This is terrible.
Yeah, that should be like your entry to Quantico should be ingrained in your mind. I had my 20 foot.
It was December of 2007.
Okay.
I was class of 0805.
There you go.
I remember. That was ingrained.
It all comes back. It all comes back. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go through Quantico, and then obviously you get assigned to Cleveland.
Yeah, so our class was something. I would love to reconnect. We need to have a class reunion. Our class lost more new agents than any class in the history of
during Quantico. You mean during the?
We thought there should be some sort of recognition for that. It's all sorts of different reasons, and that was when that's when Lost was big. Do you remember Lost?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I remember saying to my roommate in the morning, I just love it when I wake up and you're still here, because people would disappear and you wouldn't find out until later.
Okay.
What had happened, that they were gone. So I don't recall how large our class was at the time we graduated, but it was much smaller than what we had started with. And our class was also the very first class where you were given a career path.
Oh, yes. The career path.
That was also a really interesting part of my process and part of how I met you as well, because I did not have any sort of background in cyber technology whatsoever. And yet the Bureau needed some people, and they career pathed me CyBUr at the time.
Well, you were a writer, so you knew how to use Word, which is a computer program. So that was good. That was enough at the time.
There it is. That's exactly what it was that 8 pages included the word computer a number of times from one of my very first jobs in high school when I was doing data entry to writing web copy when I was doing marketing, that, I wrote a Word document and somebody else did all the tech stuff to put it online. But But yeah, that's what did it. But cyber, as you know, the crimes against children
Yeah.
fell under that particular division. And so that was definitely part of the path that got me where I was. And I thought it was terrible news when I was career path cyber, but really it was what got me to this place where I could do work that was so aligned with my passion.
Right. And we should note that you were in the Cleveland division, but not in Cleveland.
Correct.
Yes.
Right. Yes. I was assigned to the Cleveland field office, but I was actually in the Canton resident agency, which I'm not sure how you explain it, how I'll explain it sometimes. Like I've heard the 56 field offices described as kind of the mothership. Yeah. And then there's all these satellites that are further out.
Yep. That's satellite offices. That's the best way people understand it. It's an option. How many agents in the Canton RA at the time? I don't remember. It's been a while for me. So
numbers again.
I know.
I think there were 8.
I was going to say, I didn't think it was very big.
No, it wasn't very big at all. And that was one of the great advantages too, where when I came in, you as a new agent, they wanted you in a large field office because the theory was that you were going to get this really valuable experience in the larger field offices. But for me, and Cleveland became designated a large field office. And so I didn't have to rotate out of there to get my large field office experience. But the real benefit for me, I felt, was being in the smaller office where everyone worked a little bit of everything. So because I was designated cyber, I'm sent to the Cleveland division, but they realized I don't have a background or an aptitude for that particular area. They assigned me to coordinate a child exploitation task force. But even as I'm doing that, I'm being constantly engaged with the work that other agents who are specializing in other things.
Right. And here's and some inside baseball, obviously, on all that is it's weird for an office like that, because we had what's called a funded staffing level of like 8 or 10 cyber agents, and one was in Toledo, and I think were there 2 of you in Canton, or were you the only one in Canton? I can't remember.
Very briefly, there were 2 of us, and then the other left. So they knew when I came in that they were losing the coordinator of their child exploitation cases in the Canton office. And so I was just immediately tapped to be the replacement and take the helm for that. Right.
And so your FSL fell underneath my program, but since you were in the Canton RA, I didn't directly supervise you. It's a weird dynamic, right? Because there's responsibilities that I have for reporting what we do, but you were assigned to a different supervisor who may have different priorities than I did. And let's be honest, he had different priorities than I did.
It was challenging.
It was yes, it was a good leadership experience for me, I got to say.
Yeah, well, I am grateful for your leadership. It was, wow, what a training and equipping time, I will say. My time in Canton was in so many ways. And it was major culture shock. Every organization has its challenges. The Bureau has a lot of challenges. But leaving where I was and coming into the FBI in that particular set of circumstances.
You're being very kind, I must say, I believe I'm looking here. It looks like that particular supervisor appears to be still in the FBI.
Yeah, I had thought that he had left, and then had lunch not too long ago with one of my former colleagues who told me he was still there.
He's a unit chief.
Different geography, but still there.
Yeah, he's been a unit chief in OTD for 6 years. My goodness. He's been in the Bureau 25.
I don't think that's, well, I was told he'd landed somewhere different.
Well, it could be he just has, I'm going based on LinkedIn, so it's certainly possible he hasn't updated his LinkedIn profile.
No longer in a supervisory
Oh, well, that's good. Well, finally, it only took 25 years to get to that point. Well done, Bureau.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. We digressed down a road only you and I know.
No, I'll go, I like rabbit trails. I'll go anywhere you want to go with this. We just might need to edit later. Yeah. I'm going to trust you to edit out the parts that...
Oh, there's nothing edited so far. So let me ask you this question, since obviously it was a challenge, right? How many times you got there in 2009? No, 2008, 2008, right? 2000. Yeah, you were class of 08.
Yeah,
whatever.
2008. It was May of 2008.
Right. And I showed up there the next summer. So you'd been there a year and a half by the time I got there. So when you get there and you're in this experience, I guess.
Yeah.
How did it impact you as far as saying, okay, I had this dream of wanting to be in the FBI. I've got to the FBI. I've done all these things, and people would say, how, you must have been a law enforcement major in college. Right. You must have been in the military. And like, nope, I was the Habitat for Humanity public relations person. Like when I went in, they said
all the time.
Right, exactly. So it's key to note that you don't have to be in law enforcement or a lawyer or any of that stuff. You just have to have capabilities that the Bureau needs, and obviously you did. So you get in there, and then how did that experience with a, let's just say, challenging supervisor impact your experience initially?
Well, I've got a couple things going on when I walk into that. I have an extreme respect for authority. So if someone is in a position of authority over me, and part of that I just think is who I've always been, and then being very close to the military. And so generally you don't question, you comply. At the same time, I was also coming from this background, I shared with you about my time at Habitat, where I was working with people in some of the highest levels of government in every state and the country. I mean, I worked with the White House. So I've seen the gamut of people, but what I saw for the most part was people who wanted to do good.
Right. Yeah. Great. Yep.
And what I encountered was a whole different dynamic. And now I saw some sides of that particular supervisor where I saw him show incredible compassion, but also, frankly, there was I felt like a need to control and a power trip. And I believe perhaps there was this expectation when I came in, especially with my not having a cyber background, that I was going to be this protege. Mm-hmm. And he was going to teach me things. And I would run up against decisions, instructions that I just didn't feel comfortable with. And I was coming to a point where I started to share some of my concerns with the people that I was working with every day. And, the Bureau has some different sayings, like the Bureau eats its young. Mm-hmm. And I have said at times that agents are more afraid of their management than the mafia. There have been some things ingrained in culture where you have these people, I believe, for the most part, on the ground who are leading cases and really there to serve and protect. And there was my perception, perhaps, of the root culture where, and just a lot of history within the Bureau of, you have folks who went into management for a long period of time, maybe because they were looking to climb the rungs of power. Mm-hmm. And they're looking for a title. And for the majority, I don't think that was the case. But then some of us would butt heads. If we're there to do the work, we're going to try to keep our heads down, put up with all of the things coming at us to the degree that we can, mitigate the things so they don't impact the public, and just keep doing our jobs. But where I was, I think we found ourselves in some extreme cases. And I just came to some points where I felt the need to speak up. And from that point in time, as one agent later told me, you have a target on your back.
Yep.
And so, folks had cautioned me that that was what would happen if I spoke up. And I thought, well, that's completely inconsistent with the core values of the FBI, which I believed in so wholeheartedly, those values. And so I decided to operate in a way that was consistent with those. And, I don't speak up for myself. I don't advocate for myself. But when I see something that's going to cause harm for someone else, that is what, again, going back to, that's the theme throughout my story, is I'm not going to speak up for me. But if I see an injustice, I can't keep quiet. And so by the time you and I met, that had happened. And there had been a supervisor before you temporarily who sat in your chair in your office who had some of the agents. He was a very senior guy, and some of the agents who worked with me had alerted him to the circumstances, and he had really taken up my cause.
Yeah.
Well,
let's give him credit. John Kane. It was John Kane. Let's give him credit because he was, thumbs up to John Kane.
Yes. I mean, I could not be more grateful for him. I was actually pregnant, I believe, at the time I met him. This was one of the things that had happened. Like, my supervisor decided he just needed to get me out of there and was trying to get me transferred to a large field office before some things went through that could stop that, because I wasn't what he had hoped I would be.
Right.
And it was really lunacy the way that would have worked for me to be. I told actually one of the ASECs when a meeting with him was facilitated, I said, I understand the Bureau's policy. I understand if I need to move, I need to move, but I don't want to give birth while I'm traveling down I-95 with a moving truck.
Right.
And, those are common sense things that if you are in a supervisory role, you want to take care of your people so that they can take care of the American people. That's what I believe leadership is. And so that office that you occupied for me was a friendly place that was about equipping agents with the tools that they needed to get the job done. And so I don't remember what I said the first time I met you, but lucky you sitting in that same chair. I'm pretty sure I was unfiltered and just came in and unleashed. And I'm glad you were like the last guy and not like my supervisor, I will just say, or that could have gone very badly for me.
Well, if it helps, I appreciate that kind of bluntness, because that's why I never really went above being a 15. And I went kicking and screaming as a unit chief. Really, because I'm the same way. I'm like, if this is wrong, I'm going to tell you it's wrong. I'm going to tell you why it's crap. Right. But as a supervisor, I need to be a crap umbrella for the agents, because headquarters and other leaders even in the division are going to crap down on things. And if you can protect the agents from doing that, they can do what they're supposed to do, like you're saying, to protect the American people. So that was always my approach. I don't know if I was ever, it worked more often than it didn't, honestly, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you pay a price maybe for taking on that role, but it's the right role. Mm-hmm. And changing a culture takes a really, really long time. So there was a Bureau culture that was, I would say it was ingrained. I wouldn't say it's always intentional. I think one of the challenges with the Bureau is they kept putting people in charge who were never agents, who had never done the job. We've only ever had one director who served as an agent.
Right.
So the intentional stuff. And then there's people who are appointed to positions in headquarters and making decisions about programs who have no comprehension of how their decisions are going to intersect with the realities on the ground.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I mean, even that you talked about the transfer method system, and that was a Robert Mueller thing. And I forget his name. First name was Schlendorf. Dave Schlendorf? He was the HR guy. Again, he was an MBA from Harvard that came in under Mueller and did all these things that just really, jacked with what was the culture, I guess, of the Bureau. But anyway, we're sidetracked. We're getting off of that. That should be a different.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Dave Schlendorf. I can't say his name. Schlendorf and I had several interactions as well that came down the road after. Oh. You had moved on from Cleveland because I kept being that person who wouldn't be quiet.
Good.
And at the end of my time in the Bureau, here's what's interesting. I don't know if I had shared this with you, and we might be going down a rabbit trail. So
it's all good. This is fun.
But I kept being this person, right, who would get along. I'm going to obey, comply, and then wait. That's not okay. But then there were other people who wouldn't go first.
Yep.
But they would come along, or they would say, wait, there's something here that needs to be heard. So, I had made it part of my personal mission to avoid DC. I was never going to headquarters. One other agent in my office and I had decided we would just never even put in the paperwork that would make us eligible to go down that supervisory track. And yet, because of some things that I had experienced, had decided to be a voice for others. And so there were two committees that I had been selected for to be a voice to headquarters. And it was interesting when I applied for the one of the agents said, they're never going to pick you. They don't choose people like you who are going to tell them things they don't want to hear. But it turned out I was selected for that position. And I had a different supervisor at that point who had been looped into some of the previous drama, and he really supported it. And so then I took that voice to headquarters. And I remember specifically Dave Schlendorf being in one of these meetings. I'm sitting, at my computer in Canton, and I guess there's a conference room full of people in DC. And this was about a policy issue that was particularly affecting women in the Bureau. And to gain an understanding, right, we know as investigators, to make good decisions, we need to ask good questions. And so they were going to create a survey. I was suggesting a question. Others on my committee were feeling that the same question should be asked. And there were several people with director in their titles in the room who said, yeah, but if we ask the question, they might think that we would actually do this.
Yeah, there you go.
Ask the question, we might plant the seed in the minds of all these agents sitting out there in the field that we might actually make this change. And I said, well, if you don't ask the questions that get to the root of the concerns, you're never going to have the data that will help you make good decisions. And these are people, like you said, with Harvard degrees, and they're sitting at desks and they're looking at numbers. But we know that data can say anything that you want it to. And I do recall what I appreciated about Dave Schlendorf was he said, I like data. And then he left. So I don't know what happened after that. He had to leave the room and go on to another meeting. But then at the very end of my time in the Bureau, somebody thought I had some things to say, and I was actually taken to headquarters to speak to, I think it's number 2. You were looking at the organizational chart in the Bureau, deputy, and I got so used to this, beating my head against my desk because they're not listening, they're not asking critical questions. And one of the folks who had been in that earlier room had helped facilitate this meeting. I knew I was leaving, they didn't. Mm-hmm. So I think that probably also helped me to have some freedom in what I spoke.
Sure. So what year was that?
That was 2017. It would have been the fall of 2017. I was in DC for the Director's Award. I received the award that afternoon. That morning, I had the meeting at headquarters. And then I left the Bureau in May of 2018.
Oh, do you remember who the deputy director was?
Paul. A-B-A-T-E.
Paul Abate. Paul Abate. Yeah, he was number 3. He wasn't number 2. He is now number 2, but he was number 3 at the time. He was the associate deputy. Yeah, associate deputy director. Yep. How'd that go?
Well, I shared my concern, and he said, I understand this issue. You can't fix it, but you can. I'm going to call down there and take care of this. And one of the concerns I had when I left the Bureau is there had been some things that I had been fighting for, felt I was a voice for, and I never saw them come to fruition. And there had been people at times who said, well, this is too hard. This would take an act of Congress. When I hear those things, I think, okay, let's go to Congress. Well, let's go. If we all go together. I mean, I don't know about the current dynamics right now. I think there are probably some things right now that you and I could share with Congress that would be really helpful to the decisions that they're making. But again, leadership and asking good questions, I'm not sure that they're primed for that right now, but that's probably a different conversation.
Yeah.
But so I left with some things unfinished, but having said my piece, and I knew that there were other folks now who were advocates, but what I was really surprised to find was even up to a year or so, maybe less. I've still received emails from people saying he was faithful to his word.
That's good.
Telling me about policies, and it takes a long time. It's been years. It's been over the course of years, but it takes a long time to change culture. You can change policy, but to change culture, and really all it was there's the stuff on paper, but there was also the let's use common sense. And somebody in that position who, again, I think there was some value in, he had been an agent.
Right.
So he understood. I could have texted I was blue in the face to lots of other people, but he understood. And so there was the policy fix, but then there was also the human, let me just talk to these people and take care of this. So what I would say would be, I had one particular perception of headquarters, all of headquarters through the duration of my career. None of it was positive. But then what I came to recognize was, which is obvious, we're all just people, right?
Yep.
And there were people in that place who were trying to make good decisions. And I'm not saying all of their decisions were great. I can't say that I know them well or had a window into all of the decisions that they were making. But it pains me when I see the public attacks on the Bureau and when I see assumptions being made and everybody being lumped into one thing. And just the ascribing of intent and saying everything is conspiracy and the Bureau is being,
right. Everybody's dirty. Yep.
It's just not true.
Right.
I don't believe that.
No.
At the same time, I have seen, I wrote an email to one of the directors about the culture, and we try to fight the evil out there, but we need to fight it in here. And I believe I believe that was the cause that he had taken up, but he encountered a hard set of circumstances. I didn't agree with every decision that he made either. But it's much more complicated than you think if you're on the outside.
Sure.
What I told him was, I've seen the worst, which also gave me the opportunity to see the best.
Right. And honestly, with the bureaucracy that the Bureau is, and the only thing I take from Comey's time is he had a very good line that it's very hard to turn a carrier. So that's kind of what it is to trying to turn an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. It was like so trying to make changes in the Bureau is kind of like that. So it's good that Abate was able to at least deliver on that. And I'm sure he met tons of resistance on the way, but good on you for bringing that stuff up.
Yeah, well, it was, as I said, it was definitely a team effort. And isn't that ironic, right? The one place I never thought I would go, I ended up only briefly for a visit. But also, I think one of the points I take away is you have all of these people who are clamoring for power and who would have loved to have been in that room. Yeah. I don't want to be there.
Right. That makes it easier. It makes it easier to say what you want to say because you just don't care. What are you going to do to me?
That's exactly what happened. And then Christopher Wray came for a meeting toward the end of my time. I knew I was leaving. Others didn't. And I pressed him on. Actually, that was funny because I raised my hand. There was a question that was asked, and I didn't feel like he answered it. And so my hand shot up. And I just saw the ASEC holding the microphone hesitate. And the SAC goes, give her the mic.
Was that Eric?
What's that?
Was that SAC Eric?
No.
It was,
before, we don't need to say.
Oh, come on. Let's have the fun. But Eric, what's Eric's last name? Eric, Jesus. Anyway.
Eric Smith.
Eric Smith,
was one of the good ones.
Yeah, he was a guy. I was going to say, he was a guy. That's why I don't mind saying his name. He was one of the good ones. And actually, when I left.
He wasn't the one. He totally would have given me the mic.
Oh, yeah.
But no, it was one before him because the one before him, the things people have told me. He called me right before I left and said, I'm sure you're going to hold us accountable, aren't you?
That's good.
But he let me have the mic. Anyway, I don't even remember why I was telling this story.
Because Ray, you didn't like Ray's answer to the question.
Yeah, afterwards, a few of the agents said, we were scared. That wasn't part of the plan when you raised your hand. But after they found out I was leaving, they're like, that's why you did it. You knew that you were, yeah. I mean, there was freedom. I probably would have done it anyway, but it eliminates that. What are they going to do? Because I wasn't speaking for myself, but I had this opportunity to be a voice for others. And honestly, the people who were voices for me, that's the position. They were all KMA.
Right.
Would come on in and advocate, and because you weren't controlled by fear.
So what made you decide what was the tipping point that said, hey, I've had enough? Because obviously you stayed in about 10 years. So what was it that flipped you out to say, I'm leaving this craziness?
Well, honestly, at that point, I wasn't looking to leave. It was a 3-year process. Mm. I had thought once I became an agent, this was it. I have my dream job. It obviously had its challenges, but I loved it. At the time I left, I had a supervisor who was incredibly supported. We had great leadership in our office. I was seeing change that was coming. I loved my colleagues. I had great relationships with local law enforcement. And I was at a point where truly I could have skated in my career. I had just won the Director's Award, and one of my human trafficking cases had been recognized as one of the FBI's top cases of the year in 2014. So whether I'd stayed or not, I probably didn't have a lot to fear, honestly. Because of that, I had opportunities that a lot of folks don't get in a lot more years, not because their work isn't the same quality. It just happened that way for me. But and I think because of some of those advocates that had showed up in the hard things. But what was happening was I was seeing the volume of work coming in grow, and we did not have the capacity to bring justice in all of those cases, specifically the human trafficking cases. And this is something I've wrestled with for a long time. How much of many things do you speak? Do you speak publicly? Because in law enforcement, in government, so often we come from this place of wanting people to believe that we're the answer. And if you do bad things, you're going to get caught and we're going to stop you. But that's not actually the reality. And where folks are crying corruption, it's not necessarily corruption. I'm not saying there isn't corruption. I would say some of what I saw and experienced probably fits that definition, if we went into some of the details of it. But some of it is the limitation of resources. So in Canton, I had started out working child exploitation cases, and through that became aware of trafficking, of what it was, really took it upon myself to get educated and to connect with others who were doing work in that arena. There wasn't any training at Quantico, at New Agents Training, on human trafficking. I think
right. I don't think there was any. There was zero. Nothing. I don't even think they ever mentioned innocent images. At least when I went through it, we never knew what that was till you got to the field office.
They did mention that. They did mention that in training, but nothing about trafficking. We didn't have any trafficking cases until I started to look for them. And then once I started to build those cases, and once I started to talk about it in the community, and especially after I had this case that went to trial, so there was so much on the public record that I could present that in detail. And folks started to see the reality of it. And when they saw what a case looked like, they realized that they had seen those things. And so then we have this influx of reports coming in, and I have stacks of work piling up on my desk. And I had this little task force with amazing folks on it, mostly part-time officers who were constantly getting pulled off for things like child homicides, because those were the most urgent priority things. A trafficking case is something that takes a lot of time to investigate and obtain all the pieces of evidence that you need to put on the record to reach a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. And at the same time, I was seeing the movies, I was seeing the media coverage. I was seeing even our own agency putting out press releases about these kids that we had rescued. You'd have all these simultaneous operations taking place across the country, and then they do a press release on the number of kids rescued. And we need to do those sorts of operations, but truly all of that's just the tip of the iceberg. And because of what was appearing in the public, law enforcement was coming under attack for not doing enough to stop trafficking.
Right.
They were thinking the solution looked different than what it actually does. And so rather than bringing support, they were making it harder in a lot of ways for law enforcement to do their jobs. Then the programs were not based, the social services, some of them programs, specifically some of the stuff that I was seeing coming out of places like my own place of faith. I was seeing people who I really believe shared my faith and wanted to do good, missing the target because they didn't have the information that they needed. And so when a door opened up for me to go and work within a faith-based nonprofit and address human trafficking, and I was told that that could create a platform for me to share my message and establish the standards that we really needed to do that programming in a healthy way, that's the door that I ended up going through.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't that I had been looking to leave the Bureau. It wasn't that I gave up in frustration. It was very, very difficult for me to leave that job. I loved it. I thought I would probably retire from it. I think the statistics are less than 1% of criminal agents, which I've been redesignated criminal, and cyber is probably the same, but less than 1% choose to leave that job. And so I became that rare statistic just because I believed I could do more good and have more of an impact if I left. And I was that voice for, just like I'd always been, the voice for what is true and how can we better serve and protect the vulnerable.
So tell me a little bit about No More Trafficking. What is it? What's it do? How do people find out more about it?
Yeah. So first of all, folks can go to our website, nomoretrafficking.org. No More Trafficking is actually not the organization that I initially went to when I left the Bureau. I was in that organization for about 3 years and leading some direct service efforts. It was a priceless education. I learned so much behind the scenes of the challenges experienced internally in what has been the anti-trafficking movement. I really believe there are some things culturally that need to be reset in that movement. And just like in the Bureau, those things, the same things are true across our culture.
Sure.
Sometimes some of the places that can be the force for the most good have to fight internally the most evil. And I've seen trafficker tactics permeating the places that can be the greatest force to end trafficking. Things like deception, weaving false narratives, manipulation to reach a particular outcome. We've seen that internally. That's some of what we talked about with the Bureau. And so No More Trafficking is really about resetting the conversation based on truth. It's about eliminating trafficker tactics from every sector of society, everywhere, business places, government, social services, our own households, our educational system. So eliminating trafficker tactics and then empowering people. Leadership, truly good leadership will end trafficking if we're not taking advantage of the vulnerable in any place, in any sector. I say we all inadvertently have used trafficker tactics at times, and we've all fallen prey to them. Human trafficking is the cases are made on the most extreme instances when vulnerable people are exploited through force, fraud, or coercion. There's been a lot of focus on sex trafficking, particularly. There's been a movie that came out recently that has encouraged a lot of conversation on the topic, although I have concerns about some of the narrative in that movie, even using trafficker tactics. But sex trafficking and labor trafficking are essentially the same. The type of work is different. And we've become so focused on the sex trafficking, which we need to focus on, but we've become so focused on that we can miss labor trafficking and the slippery slope that we may find ourselves in, particularly in places of business, if we don't understand what trafficking is, if we don't understand the tactics, and if we don't inoculate ourselves and the people we care about those tactics. And so one, it's messaging and advocacy, but then two, it's building programming and empowering those who are building programming and doing it in a healthy way to provide the services that are going to come around people who are vulnerable, people who have been trafficked, and the people who are trying to do the work, whether it be in law enforcement, social services, or elsewhere, because they're all buried in that same stack that I was buried in when I left my job as an FBI agent. They need our support. They don't need us accusing them of having malintent or not caring. They need the resources and the help to be put in the right places so that together we can get the job done.
Well, Suzanne Lewis-Johnson, thanks so much for taking time. I'd like to have you come back in maybe a couple months and we can talk more about no more trafficking and that aspect of it, because I think that's probably obviously an under-discussed area, and obviously there's a huge cyber component to it, so I can squeeze it right into that part of it. So we need to have a further conversation on that. But I appreciate your time coming on and giving us the origin story of Suzanne Lewis-Johnson.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
So once again, I want to thank Suzanne Lewis-Johnson for coming on to give her origin story, how she got in the FBI, what she did while she was there. We talked a little bit about her new nonprofit at the end, and we will have her on in the future to talk about child trafficking, because that's an important topic that I think needs some focus on just by itself. So we will do that in the future. As always, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to download and listen to this podcast and my Cyber Smart Morning News Update podcast. I thank you for following me on LinkedIn. Because knowing you, as I like to say, knowledge is protection. And I am trying to help provide folks with just some kind of cyber intelligence, cyber knowledge that they can use to keep themselves safe so they do not have to become victims of the variety of cyber threats that are out there. And you will never have to contact the FBI. That's my goal in life, among all the things I do. So as always, understand the threats targeting you, assess your risk, proceed wisely. Contact me if you have thoughts, questions, comments on the podcast, my other podcast, any of my writings, anything. Honestly, if you're just bored and want to email me and chat, feel free to do that as well. If you have tips for the Cyber Smart Morning News Update, you can email me with those as well. Other than that, I hope you enjoy your day. I'm going to, one other thing, I'm sorry. I did a bunch of interviews at a recent cyber conference, and so I'm going to start posting those out pretty regularly. So you'll see kind of a quick increase in tempo here for the Cyber Guy podcast. So, but those will be shorter and probably no more than 20 minutes each. So look for those coming out. I hope you enjoy them. As always, let me know what you think. Have a great week.